Guardian Media is at it again. The Trinidad Guardian's editorial attacking Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar is deceitful, disingenuous, and soaked in the hypocrisy that defines its Pnm-Aligned editorial position. An editorial by Professor Wall Street. On June 5, 2026, the Trinidad Guardian published an editorial titled, "The PM's Voice Matters Most in Government." On the surface, it reads as a measured, reasonable call for Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar to return to post-cabinet media briefings. Beneath the surface, it is something else entirely. A carefully crafted political attack, dressed in the language of democratic accountability, published by a media organization that spent the better part of a decade looking the other way, while former Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley abused, berated, and intimidated the very journalists it now claims to champion. Professor Wall Street is going to dismantle this editorial point by point. We are going to give you 10 specific reasons why this piece is deceitful, disingenuous, and represents exactly the kind of double-standard media behavior that has eroded public trust in Trinidad and Tobago's legacy press. And we will close with our full analysis, what The Guardian said and what it left out. The Guardian's editorial makes a single central argument, that Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar has not attended a post-cabinet media briefing since June 5, 2025, 1 year ago, and that this represents a failure of democratic accountability. It acknowledges that the Prime Minister communicates through speeches, statements, social media, and public events. It acknowledges that cabinet ministers continue to brief the media, but it insists that only the Prime Minister's direct appearance at the briefing room satisfies the standard of democratic transparency. What The Guardian does not acknowledge is equally important. It does not acknowledge that Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar has engaged the media through direct questions and answers. The Trinidad Express published a full questions and answers with the Prime Minister, with questions submitted in writing on May 6, 2025, answered comprehensively and on the record. The Prime Minister has answered questions via WhatsApp from journalists. She has addressed the media at public events. Her voice is not absent from public discourse. It is everywhere. What The Guardian also does not acknowledge is what happened for 10 years under Dr. Keith Rowley. That silence is the heart of its hypocrisy. Here are 10 reasons why the Trinidad Guardian's editorial attacking Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar is deceitful, disingenuous, and soaked in the hypocrisy that defines its Pnm-Aligned editorial position. 1. The Guardian was silent while Rowley attacked journalists at post-cabinet briefings. The very post-cabinet briefings The Guardian now praises as cornerstones of democratic governance were, under Dr. Keith Rowley, forums for the humiliation of working journalists. In July 2022, at a news conference at Piarco International Airport, Rowley launched a public attack on journalist Darren Bahal, dredging up a 15-year-old headline to berate him in front of his colleagues. Matt was compelled to issue a formal statement cautioning against the creation of an atmosphere of self-censorship at official news conferences. The Guardian's editorial does not mention Darren Bahal. It does not mention Matt's caution. It does not acknowledge that the briefing room it now calls a cornerstone of democratic governance was, under Rowley, sometimes a stage for prime ministerial intimidation. 2. The Guardian was silent when Rowley declared there were no independent media in TNT. In May 2020, at a post-cabinet media briefing, Prime Minister Rowley told the nation that there are no independent media houses in Trinidad and Tobago, and that media houses had a problem with the truth and interest to protect. This was a sweeping, contemptuous attack on the entire journalistic profession, delivered from the very platform The Guardian now presents as sacred democratic real estate. MAT's then President Dr. Sheila Rampersad noted that this was, sadly, not an unusual performance from Rowley. And what was The Guardian's editorial response? Where was the demand that Rowley respect the media? Where was the editorial thundering that the post-cabinet briefing room must not be used as a weapon against the press? The silence was deafening. 3. The Guardian was silent about Rowley's documented history of poor media communication. In September 2024, a column published in the Trinidad Express described Rowley's own post-cabinet briefing as a conference that could have been an email, noting a clear history of poor media communication under his administration. Matt had previously raised concerns about the lack of access to Ministry of Health press conferences during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Express itself had called on Rowley to provide answers about his 2019 Integrity and Public Life Act filing. There was a documented, years-long pattern of Rowley being evasive, combative, and inaccessible. Yet The Guardian published no editorial during those years demanding accountability from Rowley with anything approaching the urgency it now directs at Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar. 4. The Prime Minister is communicating. The Guardian simply dislikes the method. The Guardian's editorial concedes that Prime Minister Persad-Bissessar communicates through speeches, statements, social media, and public events. It concedes that cabinet ministers continue to brief the media. What it objects to is the format, the absence of the specific ritual of the post-cabinet briefing room. But format is not the same thing as accountability. Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar submitted to her full written questions and answers with the Trinidad Express in May 2025. She has answered journalist questions via WhatsApp. In a world where the Prime Minister herself noted the transformative power of social media and digital communication, demanding that accountability can only be demonstrated through one specific physical format is not a principled position. It is a pretext for an attack. 5. Guardian Media and its CNC3 network have a documented pattern of Pnm-friendly coverage. This editorial does not emerge from a neutral institution. Guardian Media Limited owns CNC3 Television, multiple radio stations, and the Trinidad Guardian newspaper. Its pattern of coverage over the Rowley years, the prominence given to Pnm press conferences, the relatively uncritical treatment of Rowley's combative briefings, the speed with which concerns about the current government are amplified, tells a story that the public can read for itself. An organization that spent a decade accommodating a prime minister who publicly called its own journalism dishonest now produces an editorial demanding accountability from his successor. That is not journalism. That is partisan point scoring with a Guardian masthead. 6. The editorial ignores that the Prime Minister responded to media questions before her cabinet even sat. The Express questions and answers, published on May 8th and May 9th, 2025, with questions submitted on May 6th, 2025, before the first cabinet meeting on May 8th, is a matter of public record. The Prime Minister answered 11 substantive questions about her leadership philosophy, her manifesto plans, her priorities, her vision for the country, and her personal faith and motivation. She did so in her own words, on the record, for publication in a national newspaper. The Guardian's editorial simply pretends this did not happen. An editorial that ignores directly contradictory evidence is not analysis. It is propaganda.
7. The editorial applies a one-year standard it never applied to Rowley. 1 year. The Guardian's editorial marks 1 year since the Prime Minister last attended a post-cabinet briefing, as if this is a constitutional emergency. But where was this 1 year deadline when Rowley's communication with the public, by his own press's description, was consistently deficient? Where was the editorial at the 1 year mark of Rowley's evasiveness on his Integrity and Public Life Act filing? Where was the editorial demanding answers within 1 year about Matt's COVID-19 access concerns? The answer is, it did not exist. The Guardian applies the statute of limitations on accountability that only starts running when a UNC government is in office. 8. The editorial launders Rowley's current political attack by echoing his talking points. Ironically, on the very day the Guardian published this editorial, Dr. Rowley was quoted by CNC3, Guardian Media's own television network, using almost identical language to attack the Prime Minister's communication style. Rowley called her approach government by contempt. The Guardian's editorial uses more measured language, but the argument is the same. When a newspaper's editorial board and a partisan opposition figure are making the same argument on the same day through the same media group's platforms, that is not a coincidence. That is coordination. The public deserves to know that what it is reading is not independent editorial opinion, but the Guardian Media Group amplifying the PNM's political strategy. 9. Matt's concerns deserve a response, but not this manipulative framing. Let us be clear. Professor Wall Street does not dismiss Matt's request for talks with the Prime Minister. Media access is a legitimate matter of public interest, and Matt has every right to engage the government on communication practices. What we reject is the Guardian weaponizing Matt's correspondence as the centerpiece of a political editorial attack. Matt has sought talks, a dialogue, a conversation. The Guardian has turned that professional outreach into a one-sided prosecution of the Prime Minister. That is not supporting media freedom. That is exploiting media organizations to serve a political agenda. Matt deserves better than to be used as a prop by a newspaper whose concern for press freedom disappeared entirely during 10 years of PNM governance. 10. The timing of this editorial is designed to undercut the Prime Minister's historic diplomatic triumph. 3 days before this Guardian editorial was published, Trinidad and Tobago won 181 votes in the United Nations General Assembly and secured a seat on the UN Security Council, one of the most significant diplomatic achievements in this nation's history. Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar's government delivered that achievement in less than 13 months in office. The Guardian's response, an editorial marking the one-year anniversary of her absence from a press briefing. The message being sent to the public is deliberate. Do not celebrate this government's achievement. Focus instead on this procedural complaint. A newspaper that responds to a historic national triumph with a manufactured accountability crisis is not serving the public. It is serving the opposition. Professor Wall Street analysis. Let us put the facts plainly. Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar communicates with the people of Trinidad and Tobago. She does so through public speeches, formal statements, social media, WhatsApp responses to journalists, written questions and answers with major newspapers, and appearances at public events. Her cabinet ministers brief the media regularly. Her voice is in national discourse every single week. What she has not done is perform the specific ritual of the post-cabinet briefing room, a room that, under her predecessor, was used to berate journalists, declare the entire media dishonest, and create what Matt itself described as an atmosphere of self-censorship, The Guardian has decided that this ritual matters more than the substance of her communication. That is a choice, and it is a choice The Guardian was never willing to make under Dr. Keith Rowley. That double standard is the story. Professor Wall Street supports genuine media freedom and genuine accountability. We believe that prime ministers should be accessible to journalists. We believe that post-cabinet briefings have value when conducted in good faith. We also believe that a media organization's credibility on these issues depends entirely on whether it applies its standards consistently to every government of every political stripe, without fear or favor. The Trinidad Guardian has not done that. It did not do that when Rowley attacked Darren Bahor. It did not do that when Rowley declared there were no independent media in TNT. It did not do that when Matt was raising COVID access concerns. And it is not doing it now, because now the target is the UNC government, and the machine has been switched back on. The Prime Minister is governing. She is communicating. She just secured Trinidad and Tobago a seat on the United Nations Security Council. If The Guardian wants to have a serious conversation about press access, Professor Wall Street welcomes that. But it must be an honest conversation, one that includes a full accounting of what press access looked like for the decade before June 2025. Until The Guardian is willing to have that honest conversation, its editorials on this subject carry all the credibility of a referee who only blows the whistle on one team. In closing, Trinidad and Tobago deserves a press that is genuinely independent, not independent in name only, while functioning as an arm of one political tendency. It deserves a Guardian that guards the public interest, not the PNM's interests. It deserves a Matt whose legitimate concerns about media access are not exploited by partisan newspapers for political point scoring. Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar is governing this country with energy, accountability, and results. 181 nations just endorsed her government's standing on the world stage. The Guardian's response is to mark a one-year anniversary of a missed press briefing. That tells you everything you need to know about where The Guardian's loyalties lie.